Hello, welcome to Ekate's Crossing as we continue our exploration of the secret of Shambhala. We're still on chapter 1, so let's have a look and see what cards from the Siddhartha Tarot that we're going to continue with. Okay, we're going to deal with the Eight of Pentacles. Eight of Pentacles is about that sense of commitment to finishing the work that needs to be done. It's important to be committed, to be able to have that sense of finishing the tasks that need to be completed. Super important here. So, card number 2 has the Five of Pentacles. Again, I get that sense of being, this one here, I get the sense of being led out of the cold. Okay, so if you have that sense of finishing the tasks that you need to do, you're going to be led out of the cold. You're going to be led out of poverty. Feels like there's a richness coming in your life. Okay, card number 3. Oh, we have Page of Wands. Page of Wands tells me listen to the messages. Listen to the internal messages. Is what I'm getting here. I'm getting very much about listening to your inner voice, the internal messages. I do feel like you've got the drive and the motivation. You might not yet have the experience, so it's important to sort of listen to the messages that are going on right at this time. So let's have a look and see if there's any cards that seem... oh, this one pulled out on me. The Knight of Wands. So it tells me to make sure that you've got all the information you need to be able to move forward quickly. Important to sort of have that energy, that creative energy, that knowledge for you to be able to move forward, or the experience for you to be able to move forward. So interesting that we get the Page of Wands and the Knight of Wands flip out as well, quite clearly here. Okay, interesting cards for this as we continue chapter 1 of the thing. Okay, here we go. Fields of Intention as we continue chapter 1. For the rest of the afternoon I stayed in my room. The events at the pool were disconcerting. Who was the man telling me about the prayer? Was there a synchronicity involved with this information? Why was the attendant staring at me? And where was Will? Around dusk, after a long nap, I ventured out again, deciding to walk down the street. A few blocks to an outdoor restaurant, I heard one of the guests mention, very close, perfectly safe, the bespectacled concierge told me when I asked him how to get there. No problem. I walked out of the lobby into the fading light, keeping an eye out for Will. The street was crowded with people and I pushed my way through. When I arrived at the restaurant, I was given a small corner table next to a 4-foot high wrought iron fence that separated the dining area from the street. I ate a leisurely dinner and read an English newspaper, keeping the table for more than an hour. At one point I grew uncomfortable. I felt as though I was being watched again, only I couldn't see anyone looking. I gazed around at the other tables, but no one seemed to be paying me the slightest attention. Standing up, I peered over the fence at the people on the street. Nothing. Struggling to shake the feeling, I paid the check and walked back towards the hotel. As I neared the entrance, I caught sight of a man at the edge of a row of bushes, about 20 feet away to my left. Our eyes met, and he took a step towards me. I looked away and was walking past when I realized it was the attendant I'd caught looking at me at the pool. Only he was now dressed in sneakers and jeans with a plain blue shirt. He appeared to be about 30, with very serious eyes. I hurried on by. "Excuse me, sir," he called out. I continued to walk. "Please," he said, "I must speak with you." I moved a few yards further so that I'd be in sight of the doorman and bell staff, then asked, "What is it?" He moved closer, half burrowing. "You are someone I believe I am here to meet. You know Mr. Wilson James?" "Well, yes. Where is he?" "He's unable to come. He asked me to meet you instead." He offered his hand and I took it reluctantly, telling him my name. "I'm Yim Dolly," he replied. "Are you an employee here at the hotel?" I asked. "No, I'm sorry. A friend works here. I borrowed a jacket for him so I could look around. I wanted to see if you were here." I looked at him closely. My instincts told me he was telling the truth, but why the secrecy? Why didn't he just walk up to me at the pool and ask who I was? Why has Will been delayed? I asked. I'm not sure. He asked me to meet you and take you on to Lhasa. His plan, I believe, is to meet us there. I looked away. Things were beginning to feel ominous. I looked him over again and then said, I'm not sure I want to do that. Why hasn't Will called me in for himself? I'm sure there's an important reason, Yin replied, taking a step towards me. Will was very insistent that I bring you to him. He needs you. Yin's eyes were pleading. Could we leave tomorrow? Let's do this, I said. Why don't you come inside and we'll have a cup of coffee and talk about the situation? He was looking around as though afraid of something. Please, I'll come back at 8 tomorrow morning. Will has already arranged a flight and visa for you. He smiled, then scurried away before I could protest. At 7:55 I walked out the door of the main lobby with only one satchel. The hotel had agreed to store everything else. My plan was to be back within the week, unless of course something strange happened once I left with Yin. In that case I'd be back immediately. Exactly on time, Yin drove up in an old Toyota, and we headed towards the airport. On the way over he was cordial, but he continued to plead ignorance as to what was going on with Will. I considered telling him what Natalie had said about the mysterious place in Central Asia, and what Will had told me that night in my bedroom, just to see Yin's reaction. But I decided against it. Better to just watch Yin closely, I thought, and see how things felt at the airport. At the ticket desk, I found that a seat had indeed been purchased in my name for a flight to Lhasa. I looked around and tried to feel out the situation. Everything seemed normal. Yin was smiling, obviously in a good mood. Unfortunately, the ticket clerk was not. She would speak only a little English and was very demanding. When she asked for my passport, I became ever more irritated and snapped back at her. At one point she stopped and glared at me as though she was going to refuse to issue the tickets altogether. Yin quickly stepped up and talked to her in a calm voice in her native Nepalese. After a few minutes her demeanour began to change. She never looked at me again, but she spoke pleasantly to Yin, actually laughing at something he said. A few minutes later we had our tickets and boarding passes, and were sitting at a small table in a coffee shop near our gate. There was a strong smell of cigarettes everywhere. You have much anger, Yin said, and you don't use your energy very well. I was taken aback. What are you talking about? He looked at me with kindness. I mean, you did nothing to help the woman at the counter with her mood. I immediately knew what he was getting at. In Peru, the Eighth Insight had described a period of uplifting others by focusing on their faces in a particular way. You know the insights, I asked. Yin nodded, still looking at me. Yes, he said, but there is more. Remembering to send energy is not that easy, I added defensively. In a very, very deliberate tone, Yin said, but you must realize that you were already influencing her with your energy anyway, whether you know it or not. The important thing is how you set your field of Yin was struggling to find the English word, field of intention, he said finally, your prayer field. I looked at him hard. You seem to be describing prayer in the same way the dark-haired man had earlier. What are you talking about exactly? I asked. Have you ever been in a room of people where the energy and mood were low, and then someone comes in who lifts everyone's energy immediately just by entering the room? This person's energy field goes out ahead of him or her and touches everyone else. Yeah, I said, I know what you mean. His look penetrated me. If you're going to find Shambhala, you must learn how to do this consciously. Shambhala? What are you talking about? Yin's face grew pale, exuding an expression of embarrassment. He shook his head, apparently feeling as though he had overstepped himself and let something out of the bag. Never mind, he said lowly, it's not my place. Will must explain this. The line was forming to enter the plane, and Yin turned away and moved towards the ticket steward. I was racking my brain trying to place the word. Shambhala. Finally it came to me. Shambhala was the mythical community of Tibetan Buddhist lore, the one that the stories about Shangri-La had been based on. I caught Yin's eye. That place is a myth, right? Yin just handed the steward his ticket and walked down the aisle. On the flight to Lhasa, Yin and I sat in different sections of the plane, giving me time to think. All I knew was that Shambhala was of great significance to Tibetan Buddhists whose ancient writings described it as a holy city of diamonds and gold, filled with adepts and lamas, and hidden somewhere in the vast, uninhabitable regions of northern Tibet or China. More recently, though, most Buddhists seem to speak of Shambhala merely in symbolic terms as representing a spiritual state of mind, not a real location. I reached over and pulled a travel brochure of Tibet from the pouch on the seat back, hoping to get a renewed sense of its geography. Lying between China to the north and India and Nepal to the south, Tibet is basically a large plateau with few areas lower than 6,000 feet. At its southern border are the towering Himalayas, including Mount Everest, and on the northern border, just inside China, are the vast Kowloon Mountains. In between are deep gorges, wild rivers, and hundreds of square miles of rocky tundra. From the map, eastern Tibet seems to be the most fertile and populated, while the north and west look sparse and mountainous, with few roads, all of them gravel. Apparently there are only two major routes into western Tibet, the northern road used mostly by truckers, and the southern road which skirts the Himalayas and is used by pilgrims from all over the region to reach the sacred sites of Everest, Lake Manasorova, and Mount Kailash, and further on to the mysterious Kunluns. I looked up from my reading as we flew along at 35,000 feet. I began to sense a distinct shift in temperature and energy outside. Below me the Himalayas rose in frozen rocky spars, framed by a clear blue sky. We practically flew right over the top of Mount Everest as we passed into the airspace of Tibet, the land of snows, the rooftop of the world. It was the nation of seekers, inward travellers, and as I looked down at the green valleys and rocky plains surrounded by mountains, I couldn't help being awed by its mystery. Too bad it was now being brutally administered by a totalitarian government. I wondered what I was doing here. I looked back at Ying, seated 4 rows behind me. It bothered me that he was being so secretive. I made up my mind again to be very cautious. I would not go any further from Lhasa without a full explanation. When we arrived at the airport, Yin resisted all my inquiries about Shambhala, repeating his assertion that soon we would be met by Will, at which point I would learn everything. We caught a taxi and headed towards a small hotel near the centre of town where Will would be waiting. I caught Yin staring at me. What? I asked. I was just checking to see how you're adjusting to the altitude, Yin said. Lhasa is 12,000 feet above sea level. You must take it easy for a while. I nodded, appreciating his concern, but in the past I'd always adapted easily to high altitudes. I was about to mention this to Yin when I caught sight of a huge fortress-like structure in the distance. This is the Potala Palace, Yin said. I wanted you to see it. It was the Dalai Lama's winter home before he was exiled. It now symbolizes the struggle of the Tibetan people against the Chinese occupation. He looked away and remained silent until the car stopped, not in front of the hotel, but down the street 100 feet. Will should be here already, Yin said as he opened the door. Wait in the taxi, I'll go in and check. But instead of getting out, he stopped and stared at the entrance. I saw his look and gazed in that direction myself. The street was busy with Tibetan pedestrians and a few tourists, but all seemed normal. Then my eyes fell on a short Chinese man near the corner of the building. He held a paper of some kind, but his eyes were carefully surveying the area. Yin looked towards the cars parked at the curb across the street from the man. His eyes stopped on an old brown sedan containing several men in suits. Yin said something to the taxi driver, who looked nervously at us in the rearview mirror and drove towards the next intersection. As we drove on, Yin bent over so as not to be seen by the men in the car. What's going on? I asked. Yin ignored me, telling the driver to turn left and head further into the centre of the city. I grabbed his arm. Yin, tell me what's going on. Who were those men? I don't know, he said, but Will not be there. There is one other place I think he would go. Watch and see if we are being followed. I looked behind us as Yin gave the taxi driver more instructions. Several cars came up behind us, but then turned off. There was no sign of the brown sedan. Do you see anyone back there? Yin asked, turning to look for himself. I don't think so, I replied. I was about to question Yin again what was happening when I noticed that his hands were shaking. I took a good look at his face. It was pale and covered with sweat. I realized that he was terrified. The sight sent a chill of fear through my own body. Before I could speak, Yin pointed out a parking place for the taxi driver and pushed me out of the car with my satchel, leading me down a side street and then into a narrow alley. After walking 100 feet or so, we leaned against the wall of a building and waited for several minutes, our eyes glued to the entrance of the street we had just left. Neither of us spoke a word. When it appeared as though we were not being followed, Yin proceeded down the alley to the next building and knocked several times. There was no answer, but the lock on the door mysteriously opened from the inside. "Wait here," Yin said, opening the door. "I'll be back." He moved silently into the building and shut the door. When I heard it lock, a wave of panic filled me. Now what? I thought. Yin was scared. Was he abandoning me out here? I looked back down the alley towards the crowded street. This was exactly what I'd feared most. Someone seemed to be looking for Yin, and maybe Will too. I had no idea what I might be getting involved in. Perhaps it would be best if Yin did vanish, I thought. That way I could run back to the street and hide among the crowds until I found my way back to the airport. What else could I do than go back home? I could be absolved of all responsibility to look for Will or do anything else on this mid-adventure. The door suddenly opened. Yin slid out and the door was quickly locked. Will left a message. Yin said, "Come on." We walked a bit further down the alley and hid between two large trash bins. As Yin opened an envelope and pulled out a note, I watched him as he read. His face seemed to grow even whiter. When he finished, he held the note out towards me. "What does it say?" I demanded, grabbing the paper. I recognized Will's handwriting as I read. "Yin, I'm convinced we're being allowed into Shambhala, but I must go on ahead. It is of utmost importance that you bring our American friend as far as you can. You know the Dakini will guide you. Will." Ooh. I looked at Yin, who glanced at me for a moment and then looked away. What does he mean, allowed into Shambhala? He means that figuratively, right? Doesn't think it's a real place, does he? Yin was staring at the ground. "Of course Will thinks it's a real place," he whispered. "Do you?" I asked. He looked away, appearing as though the weight of the world had been placed on his shoulders. Yes, he said. "Only it has been impossible for most people to ever conceive of this place, much less get there. Certainly you and I cannot." His voice trailed off into silence. "Yin," I said, "you have to tell me what's going on. What is Will doing? Who are these men we saw at the hotel?" Yin stared at me for a moment, then said, "I think they're Chinese intelligence officers." "What?" "I don't know what they're doing here. Apparently they've been alerted by all the activity and talk about Shambhala. Many of the lamas here realize that something is changing with this holy place. There's been much discussion." "Changing how? Tell me." Yin took a deep breath. I wanted to let Will explain this, but I guess now I must try. "You must understand what Shambhala is. The people there are live human beings, born into this holy place, but they are of a higher evolutionary state. They help hold energy and vision for the whole world." I looked away, thinking about the 10th insight. "They're spiritual guides of some kind." "Not like you think," Yin replied. "They aren't like family members or other souls in the afterlife. They might be helping us from that dimension. They are human beings who live right here on this earth. Those in Shambhala have an extraordinary community and live at a high level of development. They model what the rest of the world will ultimately achieve." "Where is this place?" "I don't know." "Do you know anyone who has seen it?" "No. As a boy I studied with a great Lama who declared one day that he was going to Shambhala, and after days of celebration he left." "Did he get there?" "No one knows. He disappeared and was never seen again anywhere in Tibet." "Then no one really knows whether it exists or not." Yin was silent for a moment, then said, "We have the legends." "Who's we?" He stared at me. I could tell that he was restricted by some code of silence. "I cannot tell you that. Only the head of our sect, Lama Rigden, could choose to talk with you." "What are the legends?" "I can only tell you this. The legends are the sayings left by those who have attempted to reach Shambhala in the past. They are centuries old. Yin was about to say something else when a sound towards the street drew our attention. We watched closely but saw no one. "Wait here," Yin said. Again Yin knocked on the door and disappeared inside just as quickly as he emerged, and walked over to an old rusty jeep with a ragged canvas top. He opened the door and waved for me to get in. "Come on," he said, "we must hurry." Oh, that's it. That's the end of chapter 1. Okay, that's it for me for today. Don't forget to like the video, share some love. Don't forget to, I've lost it again. Don't forget to click the link, subscribe, share the link, should I say. Share the link, subscribe, and ring the bell so you know when the next video will be uploaded. Take care and blessed be.